The rain fell that night, like judgment from the heavens, each drop a witness to the injustice that had just unfolded within the golden walls of the Harrington estate. Nalani Brooks stood alone on the marble steps, her elegant dress clinging to her trembling body, her dignity stripped away by accusations she could never have imagined. Behind her, the ballroom doors had closed with a finality that echoed through her soul, shutting her out from a world that had celebrated her one moment and discarded her the next. The voices still rang in her ears, Simone and triumphant declarations, Mrs. Victoria cold dismissal, and worst of all, Elijah's eyes burning with betrayal and disgust. They had called her a fraud, a liar, a gold digger who had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to infiltrate their family. The very hands that had pulled a child from flames were now accused of reaching for wealth they had never desired. She wrapped her arms around herself, not against the cold rain, but against the emptiness that threatened to consume her from within. Yet even as the water washed over her face, mingling with tears, she could no longer hold back. Something deep within her refused to break completely. It was a strength passed down through generations, through her grandmother prayers and her mother resilience, a knowledge that storms, no matter how fierce, eventually pass. Her phone vibrated in her small purse, the screen glowing like a beacon in the darkness that surrounded her. With trembling fingers, Nalani pulled it out, barely able to see through the rain and tears that blurred her vision. It was a voice message, and when she saw the name, her heart clenched with both pain and hope. Little Caleb Harrington, the child she had saved, the innocent boy whose life she had valued more than her own. She pressed play, and his small voice emerged through the static, soft and confused, but carrying a truth that the adults around him had refused to see. "Miss Nalani," he whispered, "I remember everything. I remember you carrying me out of the smoke. I remember your voice telling me to stay awake. Why did they say you didn't save me? Why did Cousin Simone say she did it, when I know it was you?" The message ended, leaving Nalani standing in the rain, with her hand pressed against her chest, feeling her heart break and heal simultaneously. In that moment, she understood something profound. The truth was not dead, merely sleeping, waiting for its appointed time to awaken. She looked up at the stormy sky, rain washing her face clean, and whispered a prayer not for revenge, but for strength, not for vindication, but for the courage to trust that light always finds a way through darkness. 3 days later, Nalani found herself back in the place where her spirit had first learned to breathe. Her grandmother's village in the countryside, far from the noise and cruelty of the city. The journey had been long, taken on a crowded bus, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of questions that had no easy answers. She arrived as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, and the moment her feet touched the red earth of her childhood, something inside her began to settle. The village welcomed her without questions, without judgment, with only the quiet understanding that sometimes a soul needs to return to its roots to remember who it truly is. Grandma Cecile stood on the veranda of their modest home, her weathered face breaking into a smile that held both sadness and knowing, as if she had been expecting this return all along. They embraced without words, because some pain is too deep for language, and some love too vast to be contained in mere sentences. That first night, Nalani sat on the wooden steps, overlooking the fields, watching fireflies dance in the growing darkness, and allowed herself to simply exist, without the weight of accusations and betrayal pressing down on her shoulders. Here, among the acacia trees and the songs of evening birds, she could breathe again. For 3 days, Nalani remained largely silent, moving through the village like a ghost of herself, helping her grandmother with simple tasks, fetching water, preparing meals, sweeping the courtyard, finding strange comfort in the rhythm of ordinary life. Grandma Cecile watched her with patient eyes, never pushing, never demanding explanations, simply allowing her granddaughter the space to heal at her own pace. But on the evening of the third day, as they sat together on the veranda, watching the sun descend below the horizon, the old woman finally spoke. "You have been quiet, my child, but I can hear the war raging in your heart." She sent her voice gentle, yet firm, carrying the weight of wisdom accumulated over decades of living. Nalani looked down at her hands, those same hands that had pulled Caleb from the flames, now accused of reaching for what they had never wanted. "They believed her lies so easily, Grandma," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Simone stood there and claimed she saved him, and they believed every word. And I have nothing, no proof, no witnesses who will speak for me, no way to make them see the truth." Grandma Cecile reached over and placed her warm, calloused palm over Nalani's trembling fingers, grounding her with that simple touch. "Truth does not need to shout to be heard, my child. It simply needs time to grow." Nalani turned to look at her grandmother, her eyes desperate for understanding, for some assurance that the nightmare she had lived through hadn't been in vain. "But what if it never grows?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if Simone lie becomes the only story people remember? What if the truth stays buried forever under the weight of their money and influence?" Grandma Cecile smiled then, a smile that held both the sorrow of experience and the unshakable faith of someone who had seen truth triumph over lies more times than she could count. "Let me tell you a story," the old woman began, settling back in her chair with the ease of a born storyteller. "There was once a farmer who planted a seed in the darkest, deepest part of the earth. For weeks he saw nothing, no sprout, no sign of life, nothing but the same dark soil he had buried the seed beneath. He grew impatient, then worried, then convinced that the seed had died, that his labor had been wasted. But what the farmer could not see was that beneath the surface, where no eye could witness, the seed was breaking open. It was surrendering its old form, dying to what it had been, so it could become what it was meant to be. And when it finally pushed through the earth, into the light, it did not return as a seed. It returned as a tree, with roots that ran deep and branches that provided shade for all who needed it." The parable settled into Nalani's spirit, like rain into thirsty ground, and she felt something shift inside her, not a sudden transformation, but the beginning of understanding that some truths take time to reveal themselves. "You think I am that seed?" she asked, and Grandma Cecile nodded with absolute certainty. "I know you are, child. This darkness you are walking through, this burial beneath shame and false accusations, it is not your tomb. It is your soil. It is the place where you are breaking open, where you are becoming something greater than you were before. And when you emerge, you will not come back as the girl who was thrown out in the rain. You will come back as a woman who knows her worth cannot be determined by those who never understood her value in the first place." That night, Nalani knelt beside her bed in the small room she had slept in as a child, and she prayed with a sincerity that came from the deepest part of her being. She did not pray for revenge, did not ask for Simone to be punished, or for the Harringtons to suffer as she had suffered. Instead, she prayed for clarity, for strength, for the courage to trust that truth has its own timeline and its own way of making itself known. And far away in the city, in the sprawling glass mansion that touched the sky, another prayer was being whispered into the darkness. Little Caleb Harrington sat in his bed, clutching the small wooden elephant that Nalani had given him during one of her visits. a simple gift that had meant more to him than all the expensive toys that filled his enormous bedroom. His mind was troubled with confusion that a 6-year-old should never have to carry. The confusion of knowing the truth, but being surrounded by adults who insisted on believing something different. He remembered everything about that night, remembered the smoke and the fear, remembered Nalani's face appearing through the gray clouds like an angel, remembered her arms lifting him, her voice telling him to hold on, her body shielding his from the flames. Yet when he tried to tell his father, when he tried to explain to his grandmother, they dismissed his words as the confused memories of a traumatized child. They told him he was mistaken, that cousin Simone had been the one to save him, that he should be grateful to her and forget about the poor girl who had tried to take advantage of their family generosity. But Caleb knew what he knew, and the weight of that knowledge pressed on his small chest like a stone. So he prayed, in the simple way that children pray, with absolute faith that someone somewhere was listening. God, please help them remember. Miss Nalani saved me, and she good and kind, and they are being mean to her. Please, make them see the truth. His prayer rose up like incense into the universe, joining with Nalani's prayer hundreds of miles away. And somewhere in the mysterious workings of divine justice, wheels began to turn. In the city, Simone Brooks was living a life she had only dreamed about, walking through rooms she had once only glimpsed from the outside, wearing clothes that cost more than her family earned in a year. She had taken Nalani's place at the Harrington estate, assumed the role of hero and potential future daughter-in-law, smiled for cameras, and granted interviews about her bravery and quick thinking on the night of the fire. Every morning she woke up in luxury, and every night she attended exclusive events where people treated her like someone important, someone worthy of admirations and respect. But beneath the surface of her perfect new life, cracks were beginning to show. Hairline fractures in the facade she had so carefully constructed. She found herself avoiding Caleb questioning eyes, found herself changing the subject whenever someone asked for details about the rescue, found herself lying awake at night, remembering the real events of that evening. How she had been nowhere near the fire, how she had been in the garden with her phone when the alarm sounded, how she had arrived at the scene only after Nalani had already pulled the boy to safety. The guilt should have consumed her, but she had become expert at pushing it down, at justifying her actions with the rationalization that she deserved this life, that she had been overlooked and underestimated her whole life, that taking credit for one heroic act she hadn't performed was simply evening the scales of cosmic injustice. But the universe has a way of correcting imbalances, and the scales were about to tip back toward truth. Late one evening, Mrs. Victoria Harrington summoned Simone to the private study, that oak-paneled rooms where important family decisions were made and uncomfortable conversations were held. The older woman sat behind a massive desk, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable, and Simone felt her stomach tighten with instinctive nervousness. "Simone's," Mrs. Victoria began, her voice crisp and measured. "There have been questions." The word hung in the air like a sword, suspended by a thread. "Questions?" Simone forced her voice to remain steady, forced a confused smile onto her face. "What kind of questions?" Mrs. Victoria's gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. "About the fire, about the rescue. Some of the household staff have mentioned inconsistencies in the timeline, discrepancies between your account and what they observed that night. And my grandson continues to insist that it was Nalani who pulled him from the flames, not you." Simone's heart hammered against her ribs, but she had practiced this moment in her mind 100 times. "Caleb is confused," she said, with what she hoped sounded like compassion. "Trauma does strange things to memory, especially in children. He mixing up the sequence of events, combining different people faces. It's perfectly normal after such a frightening experience. Mrs. Victoria studied her for a long moment, and Simone couldn't tell if the older woman believed her or was simply waiting for her to make a mistake. "Perhaps you're right," Mrs. Victoria finally said, but her tone suggested she was far from convinced. "However, I did not build this family's reputation on assumptions or convenient explanations. I built it on facts, on certainty, on foundations that cannot be shaken by doubt or speculation. Therefore, I have hired a private investigator to review every detail of that night: security footage, staff testimonies, fire department reports, everything. If your account is accurate, this investigation will silence all questions and solidify your place in this family. But if there is even a shadow of deception, even the smallest inconsistency that suggests you have misrepresented the truth." She paused, letting the unfinished threat hang in the air between them. "Then we will deal with that situation accordingly." Simone left the study with her hands trembling and her mind racing through possibilities and contingency plans, trying to remember if there were cameras near the East Wing, trying to calculate how much time she had before everything came crashing down. Meanwhile, across the city in a modest apartment overlooking the Old Quarter, a young journalist named Amara Okoro was working late into the night, driven by an instinct that had made her one of the most respected investigative reporters in the region, despite her young age. She had been assigned to cover the Harrington Charity Gala, that glittering event where Nalani had been publicly humiliated and cast out. But something about the entire situation had bothered her from the beginning. Amara had grown up in the same village as Nalani, had known her family, had witnessed firsthand the kind of person Nalani was: someone who gave her last piece of bread to a hungry child, who walked elderly neighbors to the clinic, who studied by candlelight because she believed education was the path to lifting her entire community. The idea that this girl would orchestrate an elaborate fraud for money simply didn't align with the person Amara knew Nalani to be. So she had started digging, using her media credentials to access archives and footage that the general public never saw. She reviewed news reports from the night of the fire, interviewed staff members who had been on duty at the estate, checked hospital records from Caleb's treatment, and slowly began to piece together a narrative that contradicted the official story. And then, late one night, as she scrolled through security footage from the Harrington estate, footage that had been provided to the news station but never aired, she found it. The camera was positioned near the east wing of the mansion, its angle capturing part of the garden and the windows of the residential quarters. The timestamp read precisely the time of the fire, and Amara's pulse quickened as she watched smoke begin to billow from one of the upper windows. She saw staff members running, saw the chaos and confusion, and then she saw her, a figure in a simple dress, sprinting across the garden toward the flames, without hesitation, without thought for her own safety. Amara leaned closer to her screen, her breath catching in her throat as she watched Nalani disappear into the smoke-filled entrance of the East Wing. Seconds ticked by that felt like hours, and just when Amara thought she had witnessed someone running to their death, Nalani emerged. She was coughing, staggering, her clothes blackened with soot, and in her arms was Caleb, his small body limp but alive, his face pressed against her shoulder. The footage was grainy but undeniable, time-stamped and verified, showing exactly what had happened and who had done the saving. And in all that footage, in all those crucial minutes, there was no sign of Simone anywhere near the fire. Amara sat back in her chair, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just discovered. This was just a misunderstanding or a case of confused memories. This was deliberate fraud. A calculated theft of heroism, a lie that had destroyed an innocent woman's life and reputation. She immediately copied the file onto a secure drive, backed it up in 3 separate locations, and then made a phone call that would change everything. "Mrs. Cecile, this is Amara Okoro. I'm a friend of Nalani's from the village, but I'm also a journalist here in the city. I need to speak with your granddaughter urgently. I've found something, evidence that proves what really happened the night of the fire, and I think it's time the truth came to light." When Nalani received the call from her grandmother, telling her about Amara's discovery, she felt a mixture of emotions so complex she couldn't name them all. Relief that the truth existed somewhere beyond her own memory. Fear of what would happen when that truth was revealed. And a strange sadness that vindication was necessary at all. She spoke with Amara for nearly an hour, listening as the journalist explained what she had found and outlined a plan for revealing the truth in a way that couldn't be dismissed or buried. "We need to do this carefully," Amara explained, her voice intense with purpose. "If we just send the footage to the Harringtons, they could suppress it, claim it's edited or taken out of context, use their influence to make it disappear. We need to reveal the truth publicly, in a setting where it cannot be ignored or explained away, where the evidence speaks so clearly that even the most powerful people cannot silence it." They talked about timing, about strategy, about the risks and potential consequences. And as they spoke, Nalani felt that seed her grandmother had told her about beginning to push through the soil, beginning to reach toward light after so long in darkness. "There's a major event coming up. In 3 weeks," Amara said. "The Harrington Foundation Annual Gala. Every influential person in the country will be there. Every major media outlet will be covering it. From what I understand, they're planning to honor Simone publicly at this event, to formally recognize her as the hero who saved Caleb. We need to make our move then." The 3 weeks that followed were a period of careful preparation, of gathering every piece of evidence and testimony, of ensuring that when the truth finally emerged, it would be so thoroughly documented that doubt would be impossible. Amara worked tirelessly, interviewing fire department personnel who remembered a young woman in a simple dress carrying the child out, tracking down hospital staff who had treated both Caleb and Nalani for smoke inhalation that night, obtaining official reports that confirmed the timeline of events. She built a case so solid that it could withstand any legal challenge or attempt at dismissal. Meanwhile, in the Harrington mansion, cracks continued to appear in Simone's carefully constructed facade. She grew nervous and jumpy, snapping at staff members, avoiding Caleb whenever possible, spending hours alone in her room, staring at her phone, as if expecting a message that would either save her or destroy her. Elijah noticed the change in her demeanor, but attributed it to the stress of planning their engagement, to the pressure of entering one of the country's most prominent families. He was kind to her in his distant way, generous with gifts and attention. But there was something missing in their relationship that he couldn't quite name, an absence of authenticity, a hollow quality to their conversations that left him feeling strangely unsatisfied. And late at night, when he thought no one was watching, he would stand by his son's window and wonder about the girl he had thrown out in the rain. Caleb's persistence in asking about Nalani had planted seeds of doubt in Elijah's mind that he tried repeatedly to ignore but couldn't quite suppress. He found himself reviewing his memories of that night, questioning the narrative he had accepted so readily, wondering why he had been so quick to believe Simone's accusations and so willing to condemn Nalani without truly investigating the situation. Pride whispered that he had made the right decision, that a man in his position couldn't afford to be deceived, that protecting his family's reputation was paramount. But another voice, quieter but more insistent, suggested that he had failed a fundamental test of character, that he had chosen convenience over truth, that he had allowed his mother's influence and his own prejudices about class and worth to cloud his judgment. The internal conflict exhausted him, but he pushed it down, focused on business and preparations for the gala, told himself that everything would be fine once Simone was officially recognized and the matter was finally put to rest. The night of the gala arrived with all the pageantry and elegance that defined the Harrington family's public image. The grand celestial hall was transformed into a vision of opulence, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across marble floors, golden columns wrapped in cascading flowers, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline at sunset. 500 guests arrived in designer gowns and tailored suits, their jewelry catching the light, their laughter filling the space with the sound of wealth and power and unquestioned privilege. Elijah stood near the entrance greeting guests, with his practiced smile, playing the role he had been groomed for since birth. The successful businessman, the devoted father, the philanthropic leader, who used his wealth to make the world a better place. Beside him, Mrs. Victoria worked the room with the skill of someone who had spent decades navigating high society, remembering names and faces, making each guest feel important and valued. And somewhere in the crowd, Simone moved through the throng in a golden gown that cost more than most people earned in a year, accepting congratulations and admiration for bravery she had never demonstrated. But outside the hall, in a tall cafe across the street, Nalani sat with Amara and her grandmother, preparing for a moment that would either restore her dignity or expose her to even greater humiliation if something went wrong. She was dressed simply in a white dress that her grandmother had made for her, elegant but modest, her hair wrapped in a traditional head wrap that connected her to her roots and her identity. She was nervous, her hands trembling slightly, as she held a cup of tea she couldn't quite bring herself to drink. But beneath the nervousness was a core of calm determination that had been forged in the fire of false accusations and undeserved shame. "Are you ready?" Amara asked gently, and Nalani took a deep breath before nodding. Inside the grand hall, the program had begun, with speeches about the Harrington Foundation charitable works, about the importance of courage and integrity, about how one-person heroic actions could inspire an entire community. The irony of these words being spoken in service of a lie would have been amusing if it weren't so tragic. Mrs. Victoria took the microphone, her voice amplified throughout the vast space, commanding attention with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, members of the press," she began, her tone warm but controlled. "Tonight we gather not just to celebrate our foundation's achievements, but to honor a very special young woman. 3 months ago, a fire broke out in our family home, threatening the life of my precious grandson Caleb. In that moment of crisis, when seconds meant the difference between life and death, one person did not hesitate. One person ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. That person was Simone Brooks." Applause erupted through the hall as Simone stepped forward, her smile radiant, her posture perfect, playing the role of humble hero with practiced grace. She walked toward the stage where a specially commissioned crystal award waited, where photographers stood ready to capture the moment, where her lie was about to be immortalized and celebrated. But just as her fingers touched the microphone, just as she opened her mouth to deliver the acceptance speech she had rehearsed for weeks, the lights in the hall dimmed. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd as guests looked around, wondering if this was part of the planned program or a technical malfunction. Then the massive screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the Harrington Foundation logo, flickered to life with different imagery, It showed grainy security footage, time-stamped and dated, clearly labeled as coming from the Harrington estate's surveillance system. The date matched the night of the fire, and as the audience watched in growing silence, they saw smoke beginning to pour from a window in the east wing of the mansion. They saw the chaos and panic, saw people running and shouting, and then they saw her, a young woman in a simple dress, running at full speed toward the flames, without a moment's hesitation. The footage was silent, but the images told a story more powerful than any words could convey. The woman disappeared into the smoke-filled entrance, and for long seconds, the audience watched the empty frame, the billowing smoke, the growing fire, while tension built in the hall like a physical presence. Then she emerged, staggering under the weight of the child in her arms, her face blackened with soot, her clothes singed. But the boy was alive, his small form clutched protectively against her chest. The camera angle shifted to another view, showing her stumbling toward the garden, where staff members rushed to help, where emergency personnel took the child from her arms, where she collapsed to her knees, coughing and gasping for air, while others attended to Caleb. And throughout all of this footage, spanning the critical minutes when a child's life hung in the balance, there was no sign of Simone anywhere near the scene. The timestamp proved it, beyond any shadow of doubt. The multiple camera angles corroborated each other perfectly, and the truth stood naked and undeniable before 500 witnesses. The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by gasps of shock and the beginning of horrified whispers. Elijah's face drained of color as he stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing, to reconcile this evidence with the story he had believed and defended. Mrs. Victoria's hand flew to her chest, her carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time in decades. And Simone stood frozen on the stage, her golden gown suddenly feeling like a costume she no longer had any right to wear, her face a mask of terror as her entire fabricated world collapsed around her. The footage ended, and the screen went black, but the image remained seared into the consciousness of everyone who had witnessed it. Then, from the back of the hall, a door opened, and 3 figures entered. A young journalist carrying a tablet and documentation, an elderly woman moving with quiet dignity, and between them, Nalani Brooks. She walked down the center aisle as the crowd parted instinctively, creating a path for her to approach the stage where Simone stood paralyzed by the weight of her exposed deception. Nalani's simple white dress seemed to glow in contrast to the elaborate gowns surrounding her, her natural beauty and inherent dignity requiring no expensive accessories or designer labels to command respect. Every eye in the room followed her progress, and in that moment, she became something more than a victim seeking vindication. She became a living symbol of truth's inevitable triumph over lies, of authentic worth over stolen glory. Amara stepped forward to the microphone, her voice clear and professional as she addressed the stunned assembly. "My name is Amara Okoro, investigative journalist. What you have just witnessed is verified security footage from the Harrington estate on the night of the fire. The footage has been examined by independent experts and confirmed as authentic and unaltered. The woman you saw risking her life to save Caleb Harrington wasn't Simone Brooks. It was Nalani Brooks." She paused, allowing the truth to settle into every corner of the room, into every mind and heart present. Following the rescue, Simone Brooks created a false narrative, forged documents including testimony from witnesses who were not present, and systematically took credit for an act of heroism she never performed. She did this to gain access to the Harrington family's wealth and status, and in doing so, she destroyed the reputation of an innocent woman who asked for nothing in return for saving a child's life. The hall remained silent except for the clicking of cameras and the scratching of pens, as journalists frantically documented this dramatic reversal. Simone's legs buckled, and she sank to her knees on the stage, her carefully maintained facade shattering completely as tears streamed down her face, ruining the perfect makeup that had taken hours to apply. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her voice breaking with genuine anguish that came too late to matter. "I'm so sorry. I was jealous of her, jealous of how everyone admired Nalani, how she seemed to get attention and respect without even trying. I grew up invisible, always overlooked, always dismissed as the less talented cousin, the less pretty one, the one with no special qualities or prospects. When I saw the opportunity to claim what she had done, to finally be seen as someone important, someone brave and valuable, I told myself it was just evening the score, that I deserved recognition too, that one lie wouldn't really hurt anyone." Her words tumbled out in a desperate confession, stripped of all pretense and pride, revealing the deep insecurity and misplaced envy that had driven her to such destructive deception. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I hurt someone who never did anything but good, who never thought of herself, who risked everything for a child she barely knew. And I've been living in fear every single day, knowing the truth would eventually come out, knowing I didn't deserve any of this. The audience watched this unraveling with a mixture of horror and pity, witnessing not just the exposure of a fraud, but the public destruction of a person's entire identity. Elijah moved as if in a dream, his legs carrying him forward, though his mind was still reeling from the revelation, from the sudden understanding of how profoundly he had failed in his judgment and his duty as a man who prided himself on fairness and integrity. He crossed the stage slowly, every step heavy with the weight of regret and shame, every eye in the room tracking his progress toward Nalani. When he reached her, he did something that sent shockwaves through the assembly of people, accustomed to rigid social hierarchies and proud maintenance of status. He fell to one knee before her, this powerful billionaire who commanded boardrooms and influenced governments, humbling himself before a young woman he had wronged. "I failed you," he said, his voice raw with emotion that he had spent his entire life learning to suppress and control. "I failed you in every way that matters. You saved my son's life, asked for nothing in return, and I repaid your selfless courage by believing lies about you, by allowing pride and class prejudice to blind me to the truth that should have been obvious. I threw you out into the rain when I should have been protecting you, should have been investigating the accusations instead of simply accepting them because they came from people I considered my social equals." His hands trembled as he looked up at her, this woman he had judged so harshly, and saw for the first time the strength and grace that wealth could never purchase and status could never confer. "I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," Elijah continued, his voice breaking in a way that made him more human than he had ever appeared to his guests or business associates. "But I am asking anyway, not because I deserve it, but because I need you to know that I recognize the depth and severity of my failure. I let you down, and worse, I let my son down by dishonoring the person who gave him back his life." The hall had fallen into a silence so profound that his words seemed to echo off the marble and crystal, carrying to every corner, witnessed by hundreds who would carry this moment forward into the world beyond these walls. Nalani looked down at this powerful man kneeling before her, at the vulnerability in his eyes, at the genuine remorse that no amount of acting could have faked, and she felt something shift inside her, not a sudden rush of vindication or triumph, but rather a release of the bitterness she hadn't even realized she was carrying. She reached out her hand, small and unadorned compared to the jeweled fingers of the women in the room, and helped him stand. This simple gesture carrying more grace and nobility than all the grand speeches and charitable donations combined. "I forgive you," she said softly, her voice calm and clear, carrying throughout the hall despite its gentleness. "I forgive you because holding on to anger would only imprison me in the past, would only allow the lie to continue damaging me even after the truth has been revealed. I forgive you because that is the only way forward, the only path to true freedom." The room erupted not in applause, but in a collective gasp, as if 500 people had simultaneously witnessed something they had never expected to see in their lifetimes. Genuine, unearned, unconditional forgiveness offered by someone who had every right to demand restitution and revenge. Mrs. Victoria approached slowly, each step visibly difficult for a woman who had spent decades maintaining an image of unshakable confidence and superiority, whose identity had been built on the foundation of always being right and never showing weakness. She stood before Nalani, this girl she had dismissed as a scheming opportunist, this young woman she had thrown out of her home and her family with cruel finality. And for the first time in her privileged life, Victoria Harrington looked genuinely small. "I was wrong," she said, each word seeming to cost her something precious, to chip away at the armor of pride she had worn for so long. "I allowed fear of scandal and obsession with protecting our family's reputation to blind me to basic decency and justice. You saved my grandson's life, the most precious thing in my world, and I repaid that incredible gift by believing vicious lies about you, by treating you with contempt and cruelty you never deserved. I have no excuse except my own pride and prejudice, my own inability to see past class and status, to recognize true character and worth." Her voice trembled with genuine emotion that shocked those who knew her as the iron matriarch who never showed vulnerability or admitted mistakes. "I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness," Mrs. Victoria continued, echoing her son's earlier words, but with her own particular pain. "But I'm asking anyway, not because I deserve your grace, but because I need to acknowledge publicly what I did to you, how I failed not just as a human being, but as a woman who claims to value integrity and honor above all else." Nalani looked at this formidable woman, at the cracks in her facade, at the genuine remorse visible in eyes that had looked at her with such cold dismissal just months before, and she felt the last remnants of bitterness dissolve. "I give you my forgiveness freely," Nalani said with quiet strength, "not because you've earned it, but because I choose not to let what happened define my future. I choose grace over grudges, healing over holding on to hurt. I choose to believe that people can change, can grow, can become better than they were in their worst moments." Before anyone else could speak, a small figure broke free from his grandmother's protective hand and ran across the stage with the abandon and honesty that only children possess. Little Caleb Harrington threw his arms around Nalani's waist, pressing his face against her dress, his small body shaking with sobs of relief and vindication. "I knew it was you," he cried, his voice muffled against her. "I always knew it. I tried to tell them, but nobody would listen to me. They said I was confused, that I didn't remember right. But I knew. I remembered your voice telling me to hold on. I remembered feeling safe, even though I was scared. I remembered everything." Nalani knelt down to his level, her own eyes filling with tears as she embraced the child she had risked everything to save. And in that embrace was a truth more powerful than any security footage or official testimony could ever provide. The unshakable bond between a person who saves a life and the life that was saved. "I know you remembered, sweetheart," she whispered, smoothing his hair with gentle hands. "And you were so brave to keep telling the truth, even when no one believed you. You never gave up, and that took more courage than anything I did." The image of them together, the humble rescuer and the child she had saved, reunited at last in truth and mutual recognition, created a moment of such profound emotional resonance that even the most jaded guests found themselves moved to tears. The photographers captured it all, their cameras clicking rapidly, documenting this dramatic reversal that would dominate headlines for weeks to come, that would spark conversations about class, prejudice, the nature of heroism, and the dangerous ease with which lies can be believed when they align with existing biases and assumptions. And then, as if the moment needed any further affirmation, the entire assembly rose to their feet in thunderous applause, not the polite, measured applause of high society events, but genuine, sustained, emotional applause that recognized something rare and precious happening before their eyes. They were not applauding wealth or status or achievement measured in money and influence. They were applauding authentic courage, genuine grace, and the kind of moral strength that transcends all social categories and speaks to something fundamental in the human spirit. Nalani stood there in her simple white dress, holding Caleb's hand, surrounded by people whose combined wealth could have purchased small nations, and she was the richest person in the room, rich in dignity, in integrity, in the kind of worth that cannot be stolen or fabricated or purchased at any price. The applause continued for nearly 5 minutes, a standing ovation that acknowledged not just what she had done, but who she was, a public reversal of the humiliation she had endured in this very social circle months before, when she had been cast out in shame and disgrace. In the days and weeks that followed this dramatic revelation, Nalani's life transformed in ways both visible and invisible, in changes both external and profoundly internal. The media attention was intense and immediate. Newspapers ran front-page stories about the fraud that had been exposed and the humble hero who had been vindicated. Television programs dedicated entire segments to discussions about class prejudice and the rush to judgment, and social media erupted with millions of people sharing the story and reflecting on their own biases and assumptions. But Nalani navigated this sudden fame with the same grace and groundedness that had characterized her response to false accusations, neither seeking the spotlight nor hiding from it, simply remaining true to herself, regardless of whether the world was praising her or condemning her. She gave a few carefully chosen interviews, not to celebrate her vindication or to attack those who had wronged her, but to talk about broader themes of forgiveness, truth, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances and social status to recognize authentic character and worth. Her words resonated deeply with people across all walks of life, from those who had experienced similar injustices to those who recognized in her story a challenge to their own prejudices and assumptions. Yet despite the attention, despite the offers that poured in from all directions, book deals, speaking engagements, opportunities to leverage her newfound fame into wealth and influence, Nalani made a choice that surprised many, but should have surprised no one who truly understood her character. She did not move into the luxurious guest house that the Harringtons offered her, did not accept a position in their company with a salary that would have made her instantly wealthy, did not seek compensation or restitution for the months of suffering and damaged reputation she had endured. Instead, she returned to the countryside, to her grandmother's village, to the red earth and acacia trees and simple rhythms of life that had shaped her values and formed her character. But she returned with resources now, with the financial support that the Harrington family had insisted on providing, not as payment, but as partnership in a vision that Nalani had been nurturing since her days of humiliation and doubt. She used those resources to establish something she called the Seed Foundation, a community center and school dedicated to young girls who had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed, or denied opportunities because of their economic circumstances, their family backgrounds, or simply because they were born female in a world that still valued sons more than daughters. The center was built with both traditional architecture that honored the village's cultural heritage and modern facilities that provided access to technology, education, healthcare, and mentorship. It was designed to be a place where potential could be recognized and nurtured, regardless of a girl's starting point in life, where worth was measured not by wealth or family connections, but by character, determination, and the courage to dream beyond the limitations that society tried to impose. The opening ceremony of the Seed Foundation drew a remarkable crowd: village elders and city officials, local families and international donors, traditional dancers and modern musicians, all gathering to celebrate this bridge between worlds and this investment in a future built on very different values than those that had governed the past. Nalani stood before them in traditional dress, her grandmother beside her, and spoke with a clarity and purpose that came from having walked through fire, both literal and metaphorical, and emerged with her soul intact. This foundation is called the seed because every one of us begins as potential buried in soil, she explained, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Some of us are buried in the dark soil of poverty, others in the soil of low expectations, still others in the soil of discrimination or dismissal or doubt. But soil is not a tomb, it is a womb. It is the place where we break open, where we surrender what we were, to become what we are meant to be. And every girl who comes through these doors will be treated not as a charity case or a problem to be solved, but as a seed containing a tree, as potential waiting for the right conditions to grow into something magnificent. The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause, but more importantly, they responded with commitment, local families pledging to support the center, educators volunteering their time, community leaders offering resources and connections, creating a web of support that would sustain the foundation far beyond any single donation or initial enthusiasm. Elijah Harrington attended the opening ceremony, standing toward the back of the crowd with an unusual humility, no longer the center of attention, but rather a witness to something greater than himself or his family's wealth. After the formal program ended, he approached Nalani with a request rather than an offer, a question rather than a directive. "I would like to support your work here," he said simply, "not as a debt I'm repaying or as a way to assuage my guilt, though I carry plenty of that, but as a genuine partnership. You have a vision that this world desperately needs, a way of seeing potential and worth that I was never taught despite all my expensive education and supposed sophistication. I want to learn from you, if you'll let me." Nalani studied him carefully. This man who had judged her so harshly, who had believed lies about her so readily, who had thrown her out without investigation or mercy. But she also saw someone genuinely changed by the experience, humbled in a way that wealth and power usually prevent, opened to perspectives and truths he had been insulated from his entire privileged life. "Then let's build something beautiful together," she said, extending her hand not in subservience or gratitude, but as an equal, as a partner in work that mattered more than profit margins or social status. Their handshake sealed not a romantic relationship. That would come later, organically, built on genuine respect and shared values, rather than drama or rescue fantasies, but a working partnership that would transform both the foundation and Elijah himself in ways neither could have predicted. As for Simone Brooks, she faced consequences that were both severe and strangely merciful, a combination of justice and grace that reflected Nalani's influence even on those who had wronged her most profoundly. She lost her position with the Harrington family immediately and completely, lost the respect and admiration of her social circle, lost opportunities and connections she had worked so hard to obtain through deception. The legal consequences were significant: fraud charges, public humiliation, a reputation destroyed beyond any hope of quick recovery. But she did not face the kind of vindictive punishment or endless persecution that her actions might have warranted in a less forgiving narrative. Instead, after the initial storm of scandal passed, after she had served her legal penalties and lost everything she had fraudulently gained, Nalani did something that shocked everyone who heard about it. She visited Simone. The meeting took place in a small apartment where Simone was living, having returned to circumstances even more modest than those she had grown up in, working a simple job, living a quiet life, far from the spotlight she had so desperately craved. She opened the door to find Nalani standing there, and the sight of the woman she had wronged so terribly made her collapse into tears of shame and regret. "Why are you here?" Simone asked through her sobs, unable to comprehend why her victim would seek her out. "I don't hate you," Nalani said gently, stepping inside the modest space. "I pity the part of you that believed you had to steal someone else's light to shine. That thought worth could be taken rather than cultivated, that felt so invisible and overlooked that fraud seemed like the only path to recognition." They talked for hours that day, a conversation that was part confrontation, part confession, part healing for both of them in different ways. Nalani did not minimize what Simone had done or pretend the damage hadn't been real and severe, but she also offered something Simone had never expected to receive: understanding of the insecurities and wounds that had driven her to such desperate and destructive choices. "I know what it's like to feel invisible," Nalani said softly. "I know what it's like to be dismissed and overlooked, to feel like your worth is constantly questioned, to watch others receive opportunities and recognition while you struggle in obscurity. But I learned something important through my grandmother's wisdom and my own painful experiences. True worth cannot be stolen because it cannot be given. It can only be grown, cultivated, developed through choices and actions, and becoming the kind of person who adds value to the world rather than taking credit for value others have created." She paused, looking at Simone with compassion rather than condemnation. "It's not too late for you to choose a different path, to become someone who creates rather than steals, who builds rather than destroys, who shines with her own light rather than trying to steal someone else's. You have a choice to make about who you will be in the second half of your story." Simone wept at these words, at the grace being offered to her, despite her undeserving state, at the possibility of redemption when she had expected only permanent condemnation. The months and years that followed saw the seed foundation flourish beyond even Nalani hopeful expectations, becoming a model that was replicated in other regions and eventually other countries. A movement built on the simple but revolutionary idea that every person contains potential that deserves recognition and nurturing, regardless of their starting circumstances. Young girls who had been told they were worthless, who had been denied education because they were female, who had been married off young or forced into labor, or simply ignored by systems that didn't value them, found at the Seed Foundation a different message and a different possibility. They learned not just academic subjects, but life skills, not just how to pass tests, but how to recognize and develop their unique gifts, not just how to survive, but how to thrive and contribute and become leaders in their own right. The center became known for producing remarkable young women who went on to become doctors and teachers, entrepreneurs and artists, community organizers and innovators, each one carrying forward the lesson that worth is inherent and potential is universal, that circumstances of birth do not determine destiny when opportunity and support are provided. Nalani remained at the heart of this work, not as a distant figurehead or celebrity advocate, but as an active presence, teaching classes, mentoring girls, sitting with families, maintaining the connection to community and roots that kept the foundation grounded in its mission rather than drifting toward institutional bureaucracy or mission creep. And as she worked, as she built, as she poured her energy and passion into this vision of a more just and equitable world, Nalani discovered something profound about her own journey through darkness and back into light. The humiliation she had endured, the false accusations and public shame, the period of being buried in the soil of injustice and lies, all of it had been terrible and traumatic, had caused real damage that took time and work to heal from. But it had also become part of her strength, part of her to connect with others who had been wronged and dismissed and underestimated. She could speak with authority about resilience because she had been broken and had learned to rebuild. She could teach about forgiveness because she had walked the difficult path of releasing bitterness when bitterness would have been justified. She could inspire hope in the hopeless because she had lived through a season when hope seemed foolish and naive, yet had chosen to hope anyway. The seed that had been buried had indeed become a tree, one whose roots ran deep into the soil of experience and suffering and growth, whose trunk was strong enough to withstand storms, whose branches provided shade and shelter for those who needed it, whose fruit fed not just bodies, but souls. She hadn't just survived her ordeal. She had been transformed by it, had allowed it to make her stronger and wiser and more compassionate, rather than bitter and broken and defeated. And that transformation, that choice to grow, rather than diminish in response to injustice, became perhaps her greatest gift to the world, a living example of how suffering can be redemptive when met with courage and grace. Years after that dramatic night, when truth had finally emerged in the grand celestial hall, Nalani sat once again on her grandmother's veranda, watching the sun paint the sky in familiar shades of amber and gold, watching the children from the Seed Foundation playing in the courtyard, their laughter rising like music into the evening air. Grandma Cecile sat beside her, older now, but still radiant with the wisdom and love that had guided Nalani through her darkest hours. "You have become the tree, my child," the old woman said with quiet pride, echoing the metaphor she had offered years before when Nalani had been buried in the dark soil of false accusations and public shame. Nalani smiled, reaching over to hold her grandmother's weathered hand, feeling the connection to generations past and future flowing through that simple touch. "No, Grandma," she said softly, looking out at the growing center, at the girls who were discovering their worth and developing their potential, at the community that had formed around this vision of a different way of seeing and valuing human beings. "We have become a forest." And in that statement was the essence of everything her journey had taught her. That individual triumph matters less than collective flourishing. That personal vindication is less important than systemic change. That the highest purpose of being raised up from injustice is to reach back and lift others, to use your strength to shelter the vulnerable, and your voice to speak for the silenced. The rain had fallen, the storm had raged, the seed had been buried in darkness, but it had grown into something far greater than anyone could have imagined, into a legacy that would outlive any individual life, into a force for transformation that would ripple forward through generations. Truth had indeed found its way into the light, not just to restore one woman's dignity, but to illuminate a path toward a more just and compassionate world, where worth is recognized in everyone, where potential is nurtured in all, where grace triumphs over grudges and forgiveness opens doors that revenge would only seal shut forever.